Long before the headlines, before the screaming crowds and flashing cameras, there was always something grounding about Ringo Starr. In a band often defined by towering personalities and creative friction, he brought steadiness, humor, and an unshakable sense of rhythm, both musical and emotional. Ringo was never the loudest voice in the room, yet his presence was felt in every song, every moment of balance that kept the Beatles moving forward. As the world dissected friendships and feuds, he quietly did the work, anchoring greatness without demanding the spotlight. Now, at 84, his reflections feel less like confessions and more like gentle truths offered without bitterness. His story is not one of rivalry or regret, but of resilience, timing, and heart. To understand the Beatles fully, you must understand Ringo, not as a footnote, but as the steady pulse behind one of the most influential bands in history. Born into fragility, raised by strength. Richard Starkey was born on July 7, 1940, in Liverpool's Dingle neighborhood, a place shaped by hardship and tight-knit survival. His early years were marked by instability, as his parents' marriage dissolved while he was still very young. Raised primarily by his mother, Elsie, Ringo grew up in a household where love existed alongside uncertainty. His father faded from daily life, leaving behind only faint impressions rather than guidance. Physically, Ringo's childhood was fragile. Illness followed him closely, keeping him apart from other children and often confined indoors. Yet within that isolation, something important formed. While other kids ran freely through the streets, Ringo learned patience, observation, and quiet persistence. These early experiences shaped his personality, gentle, humorous, and resilient. Even before music entered his life, Ringo was already learning how to endure, adapt, and find light in places where others might only see limitation. Hospitals, isolation, and the birth of rhythm. At just 6 years old, a medical emergency changed the course of Ringo's childhood. Complications from surgery left him hospitalized for months, separating him from school, friends, and normal routines. For a child, that kind of isolation could have been devastating, but Ringo found a strange comfort in sound and rhythm. With nothing but his hands and nearby objects, he began tapping patterns, creating small worlds of noise that gave structure to long, quiet days. Music became less of an interest and more of a companion. Years later, another serious illness placed him back into extended care, reinforcing that same sense of separation, but also strengthening his connection to rhythm. These moments didn't make him bitter. They made him imaginative. Without formal training or expectations, Ringo learned to feel music rather than study it. That instinctive approach would later become one of his greatest strengths as a drummer. A home rebuilt, a spark ignited. When Ringo returned home for good, his world looked different. His mother remarried, bringing stability and kindness back into their lives. His stepfather offered encouragement rather than pressure, exposing Ringo to music without forcing ambition upon him. Liverpool itself was rough around the edges, but music flowed through the city's streets, pubs, and radios. Ringo absorbed it all. With no strong attachment to formal schooling, he gravitated towards sound, movement, and rhythm. Using everyday items as instruments, he practiced endlessly, not with dreams of fame, but with genuine joy. Music wasn't an escape. It was a language he finally understood. These years quietly shaped his confidence, teaching him that talent didn't always need permission. It only needed space to grow. In a city full of noise, Ringo learned how to listen, and more importantly, how to keep time when everything else felt uncertain. Skiffle, friendship, and first stages. As skiffle music swept through Britain, Ringo found his entry point into performance. It was informal, energetic, and perfectly suited to his improvisational style. Alongside friends, he played wherever there was room. Small clubs, corners, borrowed stages, using creativity instead of expensive gear. There was no pressure to be perfect, only to be present. These early performances weren't about building a career. They were about belonging. Music gave Ringo something illness and hardship never could: a shared experience. He learned how to read a room, how to support other musicians, and how rhythm could lift an entire performance without demanding attention. Even then, his natural instincts were clear. He didn't overpower songs, he served them. That approach set him apart. While others chased complexity, Ringo focused on feel, consistency, and connection, qualities that would later define his place in music history. The first drum kit that changed everything. Everything shifted one Christmas when Ringo received his first real drum kit. It wasn't new or glamorous, but to him, it was everything. For the first time, rhythm had structure. He practiced constantly, refining a style that felt natural rather than technical. His drumming wasn't flashy, it was musical. That distinction mattered. As bands evolved and skiffle faded, Ringo adapted effortlessly, moving toward rock and roll without losing his identity. When he joined Rory Storm and the Hurricanes, his confidence grew alongside his reputation. He became known not just as a drummer, but as a performer, someone who brought personality, humor, and warmth to the stage. The nickname Ringo Starr emerged organically, reflecting both his style and spirit. He wasn't reinventing himself, he was finally becoming visible. Without knowing it, he was already stepping closer to a destiny that would change music forever. Hamburg, where paths quietly crossed. Hamburg was where everything sharpened. Long nights, relentless schedules, and raw performances forged musicians into professionals. While headlining with Rory Storm and the Hurricanes, Ringo encountered another young band working just as hard, the Beatles. They weren't legends yet, just musicians learning their craft through exhaustion and repetition. Ringo's talent stood out immediately. His timing, feel, and adaptability impressed those who played alongside him. There was no dramatic moment, no grand realization, just mutual respect growing through shared experience. Occasionally, he played with them, filling in, collaborating, listening. Those moments mattered. In environments like Hamburg, musicians learned quickly who could truly hold a band together. Ringo's reliability became his signature. While others chased attention, he earned trust. That quiet professionalism laid the foundation for one of the most important decisions in music history, one that would reshape the Beatles and define Ringo's life forever. A call that changed everything. In 1962, the moment arrived without spectacle. A simple invitation: join the Beatles. It wasn't framed as destiny, just necessity. The band needed a drummer who could match their growth, and Ringo felt ready. Stepping into that role wasn't easy. Fans were attached to the familiar, and transitions rarely come without resistance. Still, Ringo handled it with grace, never fueling conflict or resentment. His early studio sessions brought challenges, including moments of doubt, but he stayed grounded. Over time, his fit became undeniable. His drumming complemented the Beatles' evolving sound, allowing melodies and harmonies to breathe. More than that, his personality balanced the group. He brought humor when tensions rose and humility when success exploded. Slowly, audiences embraced him, not as a replacement, but as an essential piece. Ringo didn't force his way into the Beatles. He earned his place by being exactly who he was: Beatlemania and an unlikely icon. As the Beatles' fame surged, Ringo found himself at the center of a cultural movement no one could have predicted. Amid screaming crowds and global attention, his approachable charm made him relatable. He didn't project mystery or rebellion. He projected warmth. Fans saw themselves in him. On television, in interviews, and on stage, his humor softened the intensity of Beatlemania. Musically, his drumming became more refined, more confident, and more influential. He wasn't chasing trends. He was setting a standard for musical restraint and feel. While others dissected lyrics and personas, Ringo quietly shaped how rock drumming would be understood for generations. He proved that simplicity, when done with intention, could be powerful. Fame never changed his core. Even as the world watched, Ringo remained the same person who valued connection over ego, a quality that made him timeless. Creativity, pressure, and growing distance. As the Beatles evolved creatively, so did the pressures surrounding them. studio experimentation intensified and expectations grew heavier. While groundbreaking music emerged, internal dynamics shifted. Ringo sometimes felt less central during these highly focused sessions, not because he lacked ability, but because the band's creative process had narrowed. Still, his contributions remained vital. His drumming on albums like Revolver and Sgt. Pepper showcased innovation without excess. Yet emotionally, the atmosphere became more complex. Communication grew strained, and collaboration required more patience. Ringo absorbed much of this quietly, rarely voicing frustration publicly. At one point, the weight became too much, and he stepped away briefly, not in anger, but in self-preservation. His return was met with understanding, reminding everyone of his importance. Even in moments of distance, Ringo's role as the emotional anchor of the group never disappeared. The end of an era, not of purpose. When the Beatles finally came to an end, the world mourned a loss, but Ringo saw transition rather than defeat. The final sessions were reflective, filled with awareness that something extraordinary was closing. There was sadness, but also acceptance. Ringo didn't dwell on blame or regret. Instead, he looked forward. Where others struggled publicly, he moved steadily into solo work, finding his voice without trying to replicate the past. His early solo success proved that he wasn't defined solely by the Beatles. He collaborated freely, embraced creativity, and stayed open to new directions. Music remained joyful, not burdensome. That mindset allowed him to thrive in a way few expected. While the Beatles belonged to history, Ringo belonged to the present, and he carried forward with optimism, humility, and a deep respect for what had been shared. A solo path built on connection, Ringo's solo career reflected who he truly was: collaborative, generous, and grounded. Rather than competing with former bandmates, he invited them into his work, celebrating shared history without reopening old wounds. His songs were warm, melodic, and accessible, resonating with audiences who valued sincerity over spectacle. Beyond music, he embraced acting, narration, and family-focused projects, showing a playful side that felt natural rather than strategic. The formation of the all-star band later in his life embodied his philosophy perfectly. Music as a shared experience, not a hierarchy. Each performance became a celebration rather than a competition. Through decades of change in the industry, Ringo stayed relevant by staying himself. He didn't chase youth or trends. He offered consistency. That reliability earned him admiration not just as a Beatle, but as a lifelong artist who understood the power of collaboration. Love, loss, and personal grounding. Ringo's personal life followed the same pattern as his career: moments of joy, periods of challenge, and steady growth. Fatherhood grounded him, giving perspective beyond fame. Relationships evolved, ended, and began again, each leaving its mark. When he found lasting partnership, it came with mutual support and shared values. Away from the spotlight, Ringo prioritized health, mindfulness, and balance. He embraced simplicity, choosing peace over excess. These choices weren't public gestures. They were personal commitments. As years passed, he became more reflective, more open about the importance of gratitude. Family remained central, with music often serving as a bridge between generations. Despite global recognition, he never positioned himself above others. That humility defined his legacy as much as any hit song. Ringo didn't just survive fame. He learned how to live well within it, looking back without bitterness. In later years, Ringo has spoken openly about the Beatles' final chapter, not with resentment, but with understanding. He recognizes that creativity, relationships, and growth don't always move at the same pace. External influences, personal evolution, and artistic ambition all played roles in the band's unraveling. From his perspective, there were no villains, only people changing under immense pressure. That clarity came with time. Instead of revisiting conflicts, Ringo emphasizes what worked: the laughter, the music, the shared moments that defined an era. He sees the breakup not as a failure,
but as a natural conclusion to something extraordinary. That outlook has allowed him to maintain strong relationships and personal peace. His reflections feel honest without being accusatory, a rare quality. Through acceptance, Ringo found freedom, proving that legacy doesn't require bitterness to remain powerful. A rhythm that still carries forward. Even in his 80s, Ringo remains active, visible, and engaged, not chasing relevance, but embodying it. His performances carry the same joy that first drew him to music as a child tapping rhythms in isolation. Audiences respond not just to nostalgia, but to authenticity. Honors and recognition continue to arrive, yet he receives them with humility. What stands out most is his consistency, emotionally, creatively, and personally. Ringo's life reminds us that greatness doesn't always shout. Sometimes it keeps time quietly, steadily, allowing others to shine while holding everything together. His story is not one of dominance, but of contribution. In the grand narrative of the Beatles, Ringo Starr remains the heartbeat, steady, human, and enduring. And as long as music values feel overflash, his influence will never fade.